that will play types of atrocities, for example, if you control someone, for example, an animal, or a pig, can be used to justify more atrocities against them because you can see them as different from yourself, which means that rhetoric shapes reality. Additionally, the next we say the right to question, however, I already in this argument is how rhetoric is used as a justification to limit the life of the other. The next will say that you were accused of solving at the death, and that the alternative doesn't pass the Geneva Protocol. I'll get to this more in a second as to why we've read multiple dissents cases to why the Geneva Protocol is bad, but additionally we contend in a world of the alternative we don't say that it would never ever happen. We just say that there's a way you have to approach the rhetoric differently. We'll answer your floating Pig's argument later. You've also conceded that there is no instance to fiat, which means that you are always seen an agency. It's critical to look at this type of rhetoric first. You've also conceded that representation is critical. The links? They say that the rhetoric of victim is critical, and because it allows us to look at who was hurt. However, you can also see individuals and survivors before you consider specific link analysis that you consider specific impact analysis that you using the rhetoric of victim always posits them as functionally being ontologically dead, which means that they will never be able to be saved by your affirmative. Also, they will never be able to access any of the type of things that you talk about because the fact that they don't feel safe doing so because they're only called victims. So you say that you were able to construct people. Can be constructed as constructing people as passive people don't get access to agency. Our argument is that this is laughable. Saying that individuals are passive, this doesn't make it passive, doesn't make any sense. That's not our argument. Our argument is that you posit them as victims always, and it will never be anything but. For example, it looks specifically in Article 17, it looks at individuals as always being victims of war, but you can never be seen as a survivor, which is why the alternative is critical because it posits that individuals can actually be able to overcome this type of violence and abortion against them. And actually, it's also that you say no link that you endorse the resolution without the semantics. One endorsement grants legitimacy, which means that whatever you endorse is binding, and the next argument is also that. You endorse the protocol, which uses the rhetoric of victimhood. You can't just say it's arguing semantics. You've conceded that rhetoric shapes reality, which means that this is critical. The next argument you say you solve with NGOs, you conceded our argument that you're not ever able to solve that this turns case because of the fact that individuals are never empowered, but also that it is used to constantly dominate individuals, which means that war is always justified if we call individuals victims because they are seen as ontologically damned, so we can justify atrocities against them. Next, you say turn prioritizing people as survivors is bad and ignores individuals that identify as victims. We are not saying that people can't identify as victims on a personal level, but that the labeling of them as a victim is bad because it means that we will never be able to assist them. It is your choice to label them that way, or rather, your plaintext choice to label them that way. That is wrong. That's not necessarily how they identify. Extend across our link arguments now. They are all this has permutation. They extend across the impacts as well. The first is ontological subjugation as someone is always dead is seen as justified to use to justify domination, but also that you force individuals to relive their trauma, but also that you consider the terms case impact because you'll never be able to help people because domination is always justified when you refer to them as victims. The alternative? They first say primitive both. They send across our number 5 argument that they don't get access to permutation because their rhetoric is binding and this was the rhetoric of the treaty. Additionally, send across this form of severance which is violent against these type of venues. Additionally, the next argument is a turn that they are a form of ally theater because they only care about individuals in a world where it benefits them to win. They attack them onto the affirmative. This is not genuine to the oppressed. It is not fidelity to them, which is usually bad reason for rejecting permutation. Next argument they say that turn the rejection rhetoric and that this rejects the PMC. That's not, or that rejecting PMC is not competition. This is not a dissent to the alternative. But additionally, we can say that the alternative is competitive through the link arguments that you've conceded, which are reasons as to why these are also dissents to permutation. All conceded links are dissents to the perm. Additionally, the next argument they say that severance is good for trauma victims. It allows them to get away from it. Yes, but our argument is that your severance of the way that you represented them is bad. They, as individuals, can choose to sever themselves, but you are not those individuals, which means that you cannot make the choice to call them victims and then be like, oh, they're survivors in like some instances, I guess. This always creates an infinite form of it's always mentally aggressive because it justifies atrocities against them in some instances. Then you say prove to the alternative because you say we're floating pick. The first is the counter-interpretation. The negative is entitled to a floating pick in this instance. Again, the negative is entitled to a floating pick in this instance. The next one is we meet the counter-interpretation because we use it in this instance to indict your rhetoric. The next one is also everything that we can then that we need because we are functionally competitive. We have legal arguments and arguments against your affirmative proves that we are proved by way you're functionally competitive. When you're not, you're affirmative. You don't read text com. You read functional competition. We are functionally competitive because we do not endorse your affirmative as it is, nor do we endorse any part of your affirmative. We say maybe in the future there could be a policy that could resolve the impact of your affirmative, but not your affirmative itself. This is not the same thing. It is like reading a counterplan that is different from your app. Then you say we steal your affirmative affirmative, however you're not, you should be able to defend your rhetoric, and you should be ready to defend the rhetoric that you chose initially. That should be say this is unfair for the debate, but it's not. It forces you to engage in better forms of critical education because you're forced to defend your representations, defend your rhetoric, and you say this is bad, and you should hear off on theory of the NPTE because the affirmative wins. But in this instance, you should not just vote for the affirmative on theory just because this is our form of offense coming out of the ground. Also, not a reason to reject us. It's not our fault that we were also sidelocked on the negative. Not a reason for you to vote for them on this. Additionally, naturally, they see other alternatives and solve the act. Yes, it does. We analyze the rhetoric. It is a representations criticism. We are not a floating pick, and even if we are justified in this instance because of the violence that you commit against other individuals. Against drones, on drones. I want you to extend across the number 5 argument that the United States has always gotten out of instances of international law, but specifically in the context of the Geneva Convention, creating classifications such as unlawful combatants. Under the Geneva Protocol 1 and the Geneva Convention, there are 2 categories of individuals in war. There are civilians and there are combatants. The United States has already created a category of unlawful combatants in order to justify ignoring the law, which means that you don't solve that, which means that you can never solve the next one. You've conceded the United States has set a precedent already, and that China already has the technology to use drones, which means that China will always do the same. But you've not answered our argument about China using currency manipulation where it's well enough. Go to the child soldier's turn. This was massively mishandled in the AMG. They just say that this is internalized. You've conceded that it results in psychological violence and trauma against individuals, also results in violence against children. I think this is an independent reason to reject the affirmative. You say the multilateral solves. How? You're endorsing a treaty that says that it's voluntary to be a child soldier. I think this is another instance of how your rhetoric is bad. There's a reason that even if the alternative is not able to solve the entirety of your affirmative, this is a unique dispatch to you and actually accepted. Yeah. Your sanction level impacts the alternative would be able to solve the law. Some international treaties to exist, but not in the context of your affirmative, which means that we're not willing to don't endorse your act. Medicine, you say multilateralism solves, but you concede our arguments the buildings are already destroyed. Additionally, you concede that instability will always occur, but also the child soldier's argument plays well here because it means the fact that these individuals will always never get access to medicine. There are always exclusions under this type of international law in order to justify continuous atrocity. This type of circumvention argument means that you will always find a justification for war. Example, we can use children to fight wars. This is usually bad. It means that your affirmative is just bad. You justify child soldiers existing. I think that's what you're doing next.
The other one will just be Is that pretty good? Conceding an entire impact page in the final round is going to lose you this debate. You can see that we turned out way 100% of the case that the people that you are ultimately trying to say are ontologically dead because of the way that you ultimately couch them, which indicates that they will always have to relive the type of trauma that you are trying to resolve, which indicates that we turn 100% of the case, and the only risk for any future solvency is going to be the alternative look at the question of prioritization. You concede that all of our rhetoric shapes reality, so your consequentialism often doesn't matter in this debate because it's a question of our rhetoric first, because that is the way that we do this. You couple this with the Durkheim arguments that indicates that we always have to play out our actions first, we always have to play out the rhetoric that we're utilizing first before we even take an action, which means that we would always evaluate the rhetoric in the affirmative first, which means that you would always evaluate this, which indicates that we are always a prior question, which means that when we turn it out by case and we also have the alternative that resolves 100% of the impact level of the case means that we already won this debate, but the next argument that we're going to resolve now is a floating pit. Look. Our argument from jump is the fact that we need to understand why our rhetoric matters. So in this instance, the internal link to the education that we are talking about is the ability to understand our rhetoric. You don't just get to say, oh, I'm sorry we said that. Our argument is that you cannot separate out of that type of language, and that in this instance it is justified to be able to critique the way in which you do this. We also indicate that we're so competitive. We would also ask you to be very conscientious of this argument because it indicates that it is the way in which our critique is couched. We couch our critique in a way that ultimately allows us to ultimately happen. We also indicate that there's no ability for you to be able to perm the alternative because they would ultimately sever both of the disadvantages to the permutation applies to the second one, which indicates there is no legitimate permutation whatsoever. Okay, the probability. There are 3 worlds. There's the world of the affirmative, there's the world of the alternative, and there's the world of permutation. The first is the affirmative world. The reason why the affirmative world is never going to be able to work is the terms case arguments are indications of the way that you identify these individuals. It's not about individual interpretations of victimhood whatsoever. You can identify as victim if you want to, but the overarching theme that you are all victims and you ultimately experience trauma is what locks you in this ontological position. You have conceded exactly what a team from Harvard Law indicates is that the ability for us to be able to do this re-victimize is also re-traumatized, which indicates that there's no ability for them to be able to have any representation as good as. But second, the affirmative has no solvency. There's not an explanation of what laws are passed, what happens, or the fact that, in the past when we tried to ratify the Geneva Convention, we created a third category for people so we could continue to isolate and exterminate them, which indicates that there's an ability for you not to have solved. There's precedence with no solvency. You don't just get to be like, oh, we solved because we ratified. Ratified in the past, didn't solve. Second argument, the advantage two does not get to be weighed against the affirmative, because if you say that these medical facilities, these hospitals will ultimately be destroyed, that means that people like the terrorists who isolate or whatever are not going to be able to grab things that are already destroyed. That makes no sense. But you also can see child soldiers, which is the internal link to 100% of this. Multi-law doesn't solve child soldiers. This sets a new precedent that individuals that are 15 can be voluntary. This is what Seymour is talking about. That psychological violence is ultimately bad, which means that there's an independent disadvantage to the affirmative. It means that the probability would ultimately be better, which indicates that we would always say that the probability of child soldiers is bigger than any of the impacts, the alternative. We would say that we'd be able to resolve 100% of the affirmative. No reason why we wouldn't be able to do this, not their policy, but a future one. Also, the ability for us to say that survivorhood is a good rhetoric is a linked and an internal link to 100% of their offense, because it doesn't allow us to dominate. You have conceded that what happens when we paint individuals as victims is it gives power to the dominator, which means that if your argument is that there's domination in the status quo and that is bad, you give them more power because you lead to that problem, the permutation. You concede dissent to the permutation, which indicates that your rhetoric is binding, there's no way to sever out of it, and that you are alligator, which means you will never be able to resolve this. We would indicate that there is no ability for you to be able to do this. Also, we would say that you're not aware, we're not, we are justified in our point in this instance means that we would be able to resolve this. Look, the magnitude of this debate would indicate that we turn 100% of the cases the way in which victimhood is ultimately there, justifies the atrocity against them, it justifies it into the future infinitely. This is how we frame the debate. It's the fact that your half-made attempt to do a good thing, but in doing that is created a reality through the rhetoric that it utilizes. The very justification for this protocol uses rhetoric that ultimately locks them in a subject position, which indicates that violence becomes inevitable. The second is the tiebreaker, that psychological violence of child soldiers. You set a new precedent. People that are 15 could go and be a voluntary soldier under ratifying this protocol, which outweighs 100% of anything that PNC does.
Okay, so I have two questions. I need yes/no answers. I need them extremely quickly. One, does your alternative result in the plain text?
Does not result in the plain text, but
Okay.
it's the impact of your
Okay, I understand that concept. The second argument is, does everyone survive war?
What do you mean?
Does everyone survive war?
We indicate that painting a dead individual, I suppose, as a victim.
No. I need a yes/no question. I need a yes/no answer. Does
I think this
everyone
is more
survive war?
nuanced than that. Like, I don't think
Does
there's-
everyone survive war? Does everyone who goes to war survive?
There are people that die, but they can rest in power.
Okay, so
and
why
not
do you
peace.
label them all survivors?
We indicate that they are survivors. They should be viewed as survivors. Just justifying their re-victimization, their re-traumatization, even after death, is still bad because it indicates that they're going to be dominated.
The topicality argument, the act in order of thrones, then the medicine advantage, and then the criticism. So, overview is topicality, perspective, thrones, medicine, criticism.
You can have, yeah.
Conceded that your criticism erases the possibility that some people might not survive war, which sanitizes conflict by eliminating the possibility that some people could be hard for, which justifies war because we can't think of anybody as being a victim of conflict, means we can never stigmatize conflict in the first place. Your only response to this is that no, we should position them as survivors. The argument is that not everyone survives conflict and we should be able to stigmatize it as such. You hand-wave this argument is a dissent to the entire thesis of your criticism, and also you label them as survivors, which means that you link to your argument about positioning as well. If it's a question of sovereignty and self-identification, then you should not grant their alternative any thesis, because you also choose whether or not they identify as a victim or a survivor. Not the theory debate. You said
I didn't really want to do this, but I got it. So your argument that we are also labeling is not really in the MG. Like, he just says it's good for us to label them this way. He doesn't say that we are labeling.
I got you. I think that this is a response to the MOC clarification, that it's not a question of like whether or not they identify as victims. They can identify as victims if they want, but you can't call them that. That's our argument on the alternative, is that you were choosing a label, you say you choose your own label. We say if that's true, your alternative links to all this office as well. I'm sure it's under consideration.
No, we want an individual decision. Mr. Shadley?
extend our remit argument, which takes out the argument that this would take out our solvency because we specify that we use the regulations of the treaty. They also go more than this argument. Don't vote down on the solvency defense. The drones advantage. Extended across the argument indicates that statistical joint overuse will ultimately result in escalation with a cause conflict with China. You can see the arguments that this will escalate to extinction because those individuals will use drones in an area territory that draws in the United States as a result of two types of China and Taiwan. You said the United States have things like Virginia convention by identifying unlawful combatants. Our whole solvency argument is that we identify lawful combatants as people who are arguably sustained conflict and hostilities. That means that the only protocol one Virginia convention is going to be able to solve that, but also if that's the status quo of the plans trying to hide. You said that we would set a precedent to use drones. We set a precedent to overuse drones in the status quo. We say that some limited use of drones is good because it allows for signature strikes and targeted killings, but not overuse because that's what collapses infrastructure. Your third argument is just that on child soldiers. The first response is your argument to our rule about you should evaluate the consequence that saves the most lives. It's just that you operate with our framework, which means the rule about should be able to evaluate consequentialism. Yes, we agree that child soldiers are bad, but you also see the second argument that says that ceding to the protocol is the only way we'd be able to change the law in the future, which means that either we ignore it and it stays that way for all the other countries that have ratified it, or we can seek to and then maybe change it in the future, which means that it's ultimately inevitable. It's not our fault that the treaty says that. The next argument I want is to extend across all the arguments that indicate that multilateralism will be able to ridiculous amount of drones will be used and only critical to be able to solve a signal. Your only response to that China will be able to use them inevitably. Our argument is that if the United States is able to draw down the amount of drones that they use, that means that it will only allow us to criticize China, whereas right now we give them the green light to use drones whenever they want in the context of territory.
Yeah, additional protocols, the answer to the
Additional protocols, the answer to the reclassification of facts. I've already answered that argument already. You've also conceded the extinction arguments between the states which give us a lot of credence on the medicine advantage. Your argument is that they've already destroyed the buildings. Our argument is that it's reverse causal because when NGOs are incentivized to be able to come in, that means they can rebuild health facilities. You also say that the child soldiers arguments already answered this. You can extend across the impact arguments because bioterrorism is most likely cause extinction because it only synthetic biology allows them to be able to create pathogens, and striking the buildings is what allows to accidental releases of pathogens, which means that destroying the building would release the security pathogens, which ultimately results in extinction. That's conceded. You should give a lot of weight on this because they don't talk about the after law. Okay? Extending across the role of House and North Policy Office of the State's Most Lives, the role of House and North Policy Office of the State's Most Lives. You can see the visa point, which says the only evaluating lives is ethical because otherwise we can allow for an ethical imposition of what value is. That's what your criticism does. What your alternative criticizes is specifically says that when you say that they're victims, when you say that they're survivors, it only imposes a kind of materialistic power structure. That means that only evaluating whether or not they are alive or dead is necessarily good because they can all agree that life is a good thing in this debate. That means that there's not ability for you to be able to solve using consequences. That rhetoric has consequences. Our argument is that your rhetoric also has consequences. Link debate. Your answer to the argument that you sanitize all conflict is just that you don't see them as survivors, which means that they positive that logically dead, that ignores the fact that they're alive, which means that we should focus on the fact that if the affirmative is in the context of our laws of armed conflict, where we say that conflict can cause victimization, that means that you should be able to evaluate this, but you do not respond to the thesis of the argument. Basically says that you sanitize all conflict by pretending that there's not a consequence to going to war, which means that it's impossible to be able to solve in this instance. You do not respond to this, you head wave this argument. The next argument is also what the term says your construction of passive agency is problematic because it's what stigmatizes being passive in the first place. That's saying that passive agency means that they're not agentialized is what allows for us to be able to glorify active agency. Now I want to go to the impact debate. You say we can see this, you can see that international law compliance with the United States allows for conflict mediation would be able to solve conflict, which means that even if the affirmative conflict impacts would ultimately solve the impact. Now the ultimate permutation, the severance one. Permutation, do the alternative. Your only answer to this is that we are severance. Our argument is that severance is good. You say yes, but your choice in this instance is bad. Our argument is that a permutation can be also solve your offense, but also solve all of ours. We say that severance is necessarily good for traumatized individuals because they are able to move away from the event instead of focusing on all the time and creating a kind of wounded attachment to that thing. You say that this is a disadvantage of the alternative, but you also they only care about them when it benefits us. Of attacking on that's a linkable mission. Not why the permutation doesn't solve, but also you can see that the ace point on the first permutation says that you are rejecting the rhetoric that the PMC did not. You having semantic understanding of what the PMC did. We just said that we should endorse the consequence of the resolution, which all lies. No framing arguments means that you can't frame us out of this debate. Also, your links are not disattached to the permutation if we allow for this, but also the relink should frame your decision. It's inevitable that we label some people because it's the all versus the app is questionable whether or not that your label is sanitizing.